Good afternoon, folks, and welcome into today's Resine webinar, Colour for Engagement, Orientation and Wayfinding in Aged Care and Dementia Care Facilities. Now, this webinar is a re-recording of today's false start. Unfortunately, we had a technical glitch, problem at my end, not clicking the correct settings, unfortunately. So we're re-recording it without Zena live with us, but we've got embedded audio through the webinar, so the presentation is still complete and full. This webinar was delivered around 2.5 years ago by Zena O'Connor, and we get asked regularly for this type of content, particularly with the amount of aged care type facilities that are in planning or currently being constructed across the country. Now, the bio on Zena, who's presenting today, she's an independent research consultant who holds a PhD from the University of Sydney, master's degree in design and a bachelor's degree, so very well qualified to talk on all things colour for Resine. Zena has presented a number of other colour-focused webinars for us in the past. If you haven't seen these, please do jump onto the website. The Resine website, I should say, and have a look as all of our previous webinars are there to view at any time. Right, I'll kick this webinar off, and hopefully this time through I will click on all of the right settings and have it proceed as planned.
This presentation explores the impact of colour and contrast, with a particular focus on colour for engagement, orientation and wayfinding in aged care and dementia care. My name is Zena O'Connor, and the content of this presentation is based on my research as well as my consultancy work. The learning outcomes from this webinar involve identifying the ways in which the attributes of colour can be modified to improve environmental visual literacy, how colour contrast can enhance environmental visual literacy and improve orientation and wayfinding in the built environment, and also an understanding of the ways in which colour contrast can be used to address the needs of people with declining visual capacity. Effective colour design is imperative in healthcare, aged care and dementia care for reasons beyond aesthetics. Colour design can be strategically used to improve engagement and, just as importantly, to improve environmental visual literacy and enhance orientation and wayfinding. In achieving these aims, effective colour design can also assist with the safe operation of daily activities. In this context, colour design includes all hue variations inherent in construction materials, finishes, textures, painted surfaces, flooring, fixtures, and fittings. Some of these are subject to regulation in healthcare and aged care. And it's good to remember that colour design is always impacted by changes in ambient lighting and the intrusion of glare. Older people and people living with dementia tend to experience declining visual capacity, and this impacts their experience of the built environment. The human visual system undergoes change as we age. Specifically, luminance contrast, that is light-dark contrast, as well as colour sensitivity decline from middle age onwards. This is compounded by issues like macular degeneration and cataracts, which are often experienced by older people. Have a look at the three images on the screen and squint your eyes to replicate declining visual capacity. What elements stand out in each image? Does the colour design in each image make it easy or hard to identify and distinguish important elements like handrails? Are the tones of the walls and the floor different, or do they tend to blend into each other? Is there strong colour contrast? And do the interiors seem bland, or is there some level of visual variety in terms of colour? Developing effective colour design for healthcare and aged care, as well as dementia facilities, requires an understanding of the ways in which colour contrast can be harnessed to enhance the interface between users and the built environment. While hue is important, variations in light-dark contrast and saturation levels have a greater impact in terms of how easily we read and make sense of the built environment in a meaningful way. So I'll do a quick recap of colour theory. Colour has three key attributes. The first of these is hue, which is the general category of colour implied by terms like red, green, brown, orange, and blue. Tonal value is the lightness or darkness of colour. It's also referred to as tone and value. Saturation is the level of purity or colour intensity, which can vary along a continuum from weak chromatic intensity through to full chromatic intensity. Every colour has an inherent hue, tonal value, and saturation level. Tonal value refers to variations of lightness and darkness of colour. In design and the built environment, variations in tonal value can help to achieve specific outcomes. Variations of tonal value can contribute to mood and ambience. Strong contrast can attract or divert attention and create focus. Strong contrast can also improve environmental visual literacy. So having a look at these images on the screen, variations in tonal value can draw attention to different elements in each image, from the figure and horse sculpture on the left to the word attention on the right. Saturation has been found to have as great, if not more, impact as hue in the built environment. Depending on context, bright saturated colours attract attention. So strong saturation contrast can be used to draw attention to key design details, which can then be used as landmarks for orientation and wayfinding. Eye tracking studies show that when we scan a scene, our attention is automatically captured by movement and areas of strong contrast. Attention is also drawn to human figures, faces, and detailed visual information. We try to make sense of this detailed visual information. It's good to understand this, especially in respect to people with declining visual capacity. Weak contrast makes it difficult to identify key interior design elements. If you look at the image on the left and squint your eyes to mimic declining visual capacity, what elements are easy to distinguish? Unfortunately, the bath, the vanity, the toilet, and the floor all tend to blend in together, making these features difficult to distinguish. Bright lighting and glare reflectance add additional visual problems. In this respect, Racine always indicates gloss levels in their paint fan decks to help mitigate this problem. Plus, every Racine colour has an LRV value, that is, a light reflectance value. Black has a low LRV value of 0%, while white has a high LRV value of 100%. Visual perception involves memory and cognitive processing, and we mentally construct what we see. Colour contrast plays an integral role in the perception of design and the built environment. Colour contrast, that is, light-dark contrast and strong hue and saturation contrast, allow us to differentiate contours, depth, shape, and objects. In the built environment, that means that we can differentiate windows, doors, walls, hallways, and in different interior zones. In this image, if we squint our eyes to mimic declining visual capacity, Similarity of tonal value and saturation levels make it difficult to distinguish the floor from the walls, the wall from the column, and the door at the end of the room. So what is visual literacy? Well, if literacy is the ability to read and write, and visual literacy is the ability to read and understand visual imagery, then environmental visual literacy is defined as the ability to read and make sense of design cues embedded in the built environment. And you'll notice with the image at the right that increasing the tonal value contrast and color contrast makes it easier to distinguish the design elements in the room. Environmental visual literacy depends on functional visual perception and cognitive processing. However, for people with declining visual capacity, declining mental capacity, memory lapse, and various forms of dementia, perceiving and understanding the environment can become highly problematic. Inappropriate environmental design is one of the two most common triggers for severe behaviours in people living with dementia, the other being identified pain issue. So as designers, that is our challenge, to make the environment easier to read for people living with dementia. Environmental visual literacy can be negatively impacted by too much visual stimuli. Cognitive overload can result in the misinterpretation of design details and features, making an environment unsafe. So when there are too many design details, colors, and patterns, users can become confused about their environment, and the environment may become unsafe for them.
Cognitive overload happens to people of all ages, but tends to become problematic, especially for older people. If you watch this monkey business illusion video, you'll see just how easy it is to miss visual cues when there's too much distraction going on.
There are a number of strategies that can help to improve environmental visual literacy. The first of these is to use strong colour contrast, preferably a 75 differential between the lightest colours and the darkest colours. A second strategy is to mitigate glare and reflectance. These strategies help to make the environment easier to read and understand in a meaningful way. Moving on to colour design strategies for orientation and wayfinding, colour contrast as well as murals and supergraphics support orientation and wayfinding initiatives beyond regular signage. Pathways, districts, zones, and landmarks can all be created using variations in colour contrast, as well as visual props and cues like murals and supergraphics. Research indicates that red and warm colours attract attention and draw people in. This colour strategy can be used to create landmarks and identify different interior zones and pathways. Compare these two images. Adding a mural or a feature wall in warm colours changes the impact of the hallway, as per the image on the right-hand side. The warm colours of the mural attract attention, they appear welcoming, and they draw the visitor closer. Here we have different examples of the ways in which warm colours are used to attract attention, create a welcoming space, and draw the visitor closer in. So on the left-hand side, we have the sunny lounge with its bright yellow wall, creating a welcoming space. In the middle image, we have an orange doorway indicating a specific location. And on the right-hand side, we have warm colours creating a warm, welcoming lounge area with a red wall at the end, drawing the user closer and further into that space. Colour contrast, murals, supergraphics, and feature walls can be strategically used to create particular zones, landmarks, and pathways. On the left-hand side, a two-story supergraphic provides a large-scale orientation device at an aged care facility. Similarly, on the right-hand side, a bright yellow wall provides a welcoming signal, enticing people to go towards the dining room. This is in a very modest aged care facility in Sydney. Coloured doors are now a common feature in aged care, and these enable residents to find their own room easily. Different coloured doors also act as landmarks, providing other residents with orientation markers. Feature walls, as well as memory boxes installed at the entrance to a resident's room, hold mementos of their early life and can act as both a memory boost and a visual cue for wayfinding. In healthcare, aged care, as well as commercial and hospitality environments, use colour to create different zones, but avoid using too many distinct colour schemes. Multiple colour schemes can become confusing and difficult to remember. Also, use colour schemes that are relatively familiar and have straightforward names that are easy to identify, remember, and communicate to others, irrespective of age and cultural background. Colour coding on different levels in a multi-level facility provides relatively easy visual cues for patients, staff, and visitors across healthcare and aged care. Colour-coded and large-scale signage at every key intersection throughout a building assists with orientation and wayfinding.
Here's another example of simple colour palette changes to multiple similar corridors to create differentiation amongst these.
In respect to colour strategies that enhance engagement and well-being, it's good to remember that in healthcare and aged care, white, grey and hospital green are often perceived to be cold, clinical, depressing and unwelcoming. Avoid colour design that is primarily white coupled with grey and green, as this makes a space seem cold and clinical, adding to anxiety levels. Colour variety and cheerful, joyful colours are perceived as welcoming and friendly. Welcoming pops of saturated colour can be used nested within a neutral colour scheme. This adds colour contrast as well as visual variety, offsetting feelings of anxiety and fear by users of the space. This interior features sky blue as well as a range of warm, saturated hues, sunny yellows, pinks, mauves, and these contrast with the neutral colour scheme and enliven the interior. Stronger, more saturated colour in aged care not only adds a cheerful edge, but is more readily perceived by people with declining visual capacity. Remember that luminance contrast, that is light-dark contrast, as well as colour sensitivity decline from middle age onwards.
It's good to remember that polychromy, the use of multiple colours, is associated with playfulness, vitality, diversity and inclusion in healthcare facilities. Contrasting colours add a sense of vibrancy and visual variety.
Colour design that is perceived as cold, clinical, unwelcoming and hospital-like can have negative impacts on patients, visitors and hospital staff. Research suggests that colour design strategies that feature familiar and home-like colours can help to reduce anxiety and enhance a sense of well-being in healthcare and aged care. Tonal value contrast can be tweaked so that it's used to enhance environmental visual literacy in these environments.
Here are some more examples of familiar home-like colours. You'll notice that the contrast of tonal value and hue enhances environmental visual literacy within these spaces and also adds a sense of vitality. Here are two institutional bathrooms. On the left is a bland, unwelcoming space. On the right, feature walls painted in more contemporary colours refresh and update the bathroom, making it look less institutional and more welcoming. Here's an interesting project. With paint supplied by a local paint company, residents at this assisted living community facility created their own mural based on their knowledge and memories of their local park.
Familiar and home-like colour schemes are particularly important in hospice design, where quality of life is a key aim. Colour schemes that feature hue similarity tend to feel more comfortable, while colour schemes that don't share hue similarity, but which exhibit contrasts of hue, saturation, and tonal value, tend to feel more energising. We also tend to feel more comfortable when the allocation of tonal values within an interior space matches that of nature. That is, with darker colours at floor level, intermediate tones around the space, placed on the walls around the space, and with lighter tonal values at ceiling level. This placement of tonal values reflects the tonal value allocation in nature. Both of these images feature that allocation of tonal values, with darker tonal values at floor level and much lighter tonal values at ceiling level. The representation of nature in interior spaces tends to have positive impact and can enhance feelings of comfort, relaxation, well-being, and creativity. The colours of nature and imagery that reflects nature tend to have a similar effect, albeit not as strong as a walk in the park or time spent in the garden. This evidence-based approach is underpinned by universal preferences for biophilia, a term first coined by Fromm to represent our strong attraction and sense of affinity for nature. Wilson suggested that we're hardwired to seek out connections with nature. And Kaplan's restoration theory suggested that people suffering from attentional fatigue and associated stress can concentrate better after spending time in nature or viewing nature. In healthcare and aged care, add a sense of nature with nature-inspired colour schemes, as well as murals and supergraphics that feature nature. These also act as landmarks for orientation and wayfinding, either on the inside or outside in the garden. Nature-inspired murals and design elements feature throughout this facility, in lounge areas and hallways. These murals encourage engagement and provide landmarks for orientation. A patient-centred approach was applied in the design of this hospital ward. Views of nature, bright saturated colour, and nature-inspired graphics contrast with the neutral colour scheme. The aim being to enhance patient experience and help to improve recovery rates. Design for dementia has progressed to design that focuses on and supports quality of life. People living with dementia often have difficulty screening out high levels of environmental stimuli, and research recommends reducing disturbing stimulation and enhancing useful stimulation. Research also found that residents were less verbally aggressive when sensory input is more understandable. So a supportive and meaningfully designed environment can help those living with dementia and reduce triggers for aggressive behaviour. Aside from cognitive impairment and memory issues, people living with dementia may experience a number of visual issues that impact their perception of the built environment. Visual processing may be slower. They may misinterpret visual information, so black mats may look like holes, blue floors might look like water or a puddle, and geometric patterns may be perceived as sharp objects. They may experience sensory overload, double vision, or ghosting. And visual hallucinations may be experienced by some who have difficulty discriminating between real and imaginary scenarios. From her experience living with dementia, Agnes Houston, author and dementia campaigner, summarises the visual issues experienced by people living with dementia as your eyes see, but your brain doesn't interpret the information immediately. Agnes's video provides insight into some of the challenges experienced by people living with dementia. Strong colour contrast is particularly important for environments designed for people living with dementia. Strong colour contrast improves environmental visual literacy, and it helps to make details easier to distinguish. When you compare these two images, the image at right features a mural in warm colours at the end of the hallway, acting as a landmark and drawing people closer. Handrails and skirtings are in a contrasting dark brown, making these easier to distinguish and to use. Strong colour contrast, around 75% differential, between key design elements like handrails, doors, walls, and so on, help to optimise orientation, wayfinding, and the intuitive use of the environment. Notice in the image at the right that the doors and walls at the far end of the room are the same colour. They're white, and it makes the doors difficult to distinguish. Light reflectance values can help you to achieve strong colour contrast. Light reflectance values can be used to determine contrast levels between different design details and painted surfaces. Light reflectance values work on a scale of 0 to 100%, where 0% is black and 100% is white. All Racine paint colours have an LRV value, indicated on every colour sample, on Fandex, and online. Strong contrast also helps those who experience colour blindness, as strong tonal value difference will help them differentiate design details, irrespective of hue. In the image on the screen, we have Racine Tranquil, a light blue which has an LRV value of around 87%. Alongside it is Racine St Kilda, which has an LRV value of around 9%. The contrast differential between these two colours is 78%. You may wish to try this for yourself. Find some colours and check their LRV value. Keep selecting colours until you've found two that contrast by 75%. Research indicates that environmental design can help residents to maintain dignity, a sense of competence and joy through the use of familiar design archetypes, home-like colours, furniture and fittings. Privacy, personalisation and an easily understood environment is associated with reduction in agitation and aggression. Colour variety and bright saturated colours are recommended, and these can be nested within a simple overall colour design. Effective colour design can minimise the institutional nature of aged care and dementia facilities and help contribute to an improved sense of joy, playfulness and well-being. Colour variation and saturated colour accents can provide helpful, gentle stimulation, plus differentiate different zones and spaces. Use colour contrast to distinguish design details like handrails, but balance colour design to avoid overstimulation. Dementia patients often use visual cues to orientate themselves when they feel confused. In the image on the left, a supergraphic defines a comfortable seating area, while in the image on the right, a large-scale interactive supergraphic adds a sense of playfulness while providing a distraction from the exit. Research indicates that it's best not to camouflage doorways and exits, as this can add to a sense of confusion. An option is to provide a visual diversion instead. An interior streetscape has been installed in this aged care facility. This streetscape creates a new reality based on familiar memories and design archetypes. Strong saturated colours and colour contrast are nested within a neutral colour design. These strong saturated colours and contrasting colours are used to distinguish different landmarks and zones. Here's another example of an interior streetscape installed in a dementia care facility. Notice the familiar design archetypes and the careful use of colour contrast allocated throughout the space. You may also notice the backlit mural on the ceiling. I hope you've found this presentation useful and have gained additional insight into the ways in which colour and colour contrast can improve engagement, orientation and wayfinding in aged care and dementia care. Thank you.
Okay, team, that does bring us to the end of the webinar today. Thanks for viewing this. This, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the re-recording of the original live webinar where we had a technical glitch and lost our audio, unfortunately, with the presentation. So thanks to those that have stayed with us and have had the patience to re-watch the webinar. I'm sure you found some very useful and interesting information throughout the webinar. For those that would like to contact Zena, please do email us at webinar@resene.co.nz and we'll respond with with Zena's contact details. They'll also pop up as well for those viewing in time. They'll pop up on the automated emails that will come through from the original registration on the live webinar. Zena's details will be there. So thanks again for tuning in and watching the webinar. If you wish to view any of the other Resene webinars, they're always available on our website. To view, you just click on the specify area in the drop-down menu. You'll see the webinar page there quite clearly. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you at the next webinar.